So much for joining us today for this One West Tourism Alliance webinar with our awesome host, Adam Stoker from Brand Revolt. Congratulations again on that awesome rebrand, Adam. We're super excited about that for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. But Adam put together an amazing panel and a great discussion for us today. And so, Adam, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Melissa, and appreciate the opportunity to have this webinar. I'll introduce just myself briefly to everybody. Like Melissa mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of Brand Revolt. Many of you may have known me as the CEO of Relic. We've just completed a rebrand, and it's been a long, arduous process that we're excited to have completed. For those of you that have been through a rebrand, you probably know what I'm talking about. And also, some of you may know me as the host of the Destination Marketing Podcast, and I'm going to do my best here to try not to just make this sound like a podcast episode. But I've got some really talented people that I've brought in to join me for a topic that I'm really passionate about. And so I'd like to maybe start with having each of my panelists here introduce themselves and what they do, what destination they're from. And I'll kind of tee up the conversation from there. So Malia, let's start with you. Will you tell us your name, title, and I guess we your name's on the screen now. We got that fixed. But tell us who you are and where you're from and what you do.
Sure. I'm Malia Hames. I work with Alabama Mountain Lakes Tourist Association or Visit North Alabama on social media. And I'm our social media manager and also our podcast host of Unexpected Adventures in North Alabama.
Great. And Malia, I actually just checked out your TikTok yesterday, and it seems like it's blowing up lately. You're getting some
It,
great engagement there.
yes, it was. I'm not really sure what happened. We'd kind of been trucking along a little bit. And then all of us, I'm like, all I need is just that one to go viral. And then it's kind of been rolling. So,
Yeah, we may talk a little bit about that today.
yeah.
Stuart, why don't you introduce yourself to us?
Oh, hey everyone. I'm Stuart Butler. I'm the CMO of Visit Myrtle Beach, and I also co-host a show with Adam called Destination Discourse, which you can listen to as a podcast, or if you want to see our ugly faces, you can watch on YouTube as well. So,
Yeah, and thanks, Stuart. I we've got a face for radio, but we do our best.
this
Go
is
ahead,
true.
Rob. How about you?
Yeah, so Rob Wells, I'm the president and CEO of Visit Beaufort, Port Royal, and the Sea Islands here on the coast of South Carolina, not that far away from Stewart and Myrtle Beach. We are recovering from that snowpocalypse that just about wiped us out of the South here. I think kind of ruined it. But I too participate in a podcast here, the Intercoastal Podcast, which is I think is probably one of our best pieces of content production that we've had in a while. But we also do a lot of other things here. But we grateful to be a part of this conversation today.
Great. And thank you all for being here from the East Coast. Yeah, the pictures that I've seen over the last week of snow on the beach was definitely new for me, and you've all been dealing with some unique challenges. So I appreciate you joining us today. I want to basically tee up the topic of the conversation. The title of this webinar is Why Farming is the Path to Sustainable Strategy for Destinations. And the way I want to kind of start this conversation is by giving you one of my favorite analogies when I talk about marketing for tourism destinations. And that's that really, as marketers, we have two choices: hunting or farming. And I like to kind of, you pretend that the zombie apocalypse has hit, and I'm out in the wilderness with my family, just trying to keep everybody alive. And I've got two choices to feed my family. Number one is I can hunt, and two is I can farm. And if I go hunt, I can go out. Let's say I get a deer, I bring it home, I feed my family. About 3 or 4 days later, I've got to go hunt again. And so a hunting centric strategy, I would say, is very comparable to a paid media centric strategy that a lot of us use, because you need those marketing dollars to get to a conversion immediately. Whereas with farming, it takes a ton more work up front. It's a much longer term process. And you've got to till the ground, you've got to water the crops, you've got to, harvest and store and all the different things that you have to do. But if you do it correctly, you can feed your family for the entire winter. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Is I brought on these three panelists who I believe have really embraced farming as a marketing concept for their destinations and have also gotten to really see a lot of the positive impact and results from leveraging that farming strategy. And I was hoping that maybe I could have each of you, Rob, Stewart, and Malia, first of all, give me your kind of how you've interpreted and implemented this strategy of farming in your destination. And, Rob, you were the first podcast that ever started with our organization, the first one we ever worked with. And it's been really fun to see the evolution of yours. So I'd love to have you maybe start us off with what your farming strategies include.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity then. So, when it comes to farming, and just for a record, I grew up on a farm. I grew up, my parents on hog farms, and that's what we did when I first got started. So, farming hits close to home, obviously, but we wanted to focus on using our podcast in more of an evergreen moment, truly organic. Let its growth be natural. Let how people found out about it, how we shared it, those type of things to be organic in nature. And we wanted to cultivate those relationships through some storytelling and build this valuable content that we could keep using over and over and over again. And one episode led to another episode, and now we're in our 115th, 16th episode launch. Our team does a very good job, but we have people that want to be a part of that storytelling. They want to tell their version of the story. And that has been so beneficial to us because it's very authentic. It's not a forced approach. It allows us to build some trust with our listeners, but also our stakeholders, which is something, to be honest, we did not know that's a benefit. We did not realize that was going to be something that jumped off the map real quick. But the trust we built up both to our listeners, to potential visitors, but also to our stakeholders has been huge. So I'll leave it there. I know there's more to share, but that's kind of the intro for us.
Yeah, let's come back to the stakeholder piece because I think that's an important part of the discussion. Stewart, how about for you guys in Visit Myrtle Beach?
Yeah, so I came into the industry from the outside. I came in from a tangential industry, the hotel space, and I ran a digital agency there for 20 years. And we had sort of stumbled on this concept of whether you call it owned media or branded entertainment or farming. We stumbled upon it through a podcast that we created for the agency. We didn't invest a lot. We spent $80, bought a Yeti mic, plunked it down in the middle of a table, and just started having conversations. And we had been consumers of podcasts, so we sort of knew what we liked, and we said, okay, we have to do two things. We have to make sure this is entertaining first and foremost, and make sure it's educational. Like someone can take something away from every episode. And fast forward 6 years, we went from an $80 investment. We had hundreds of thousands of downloads of the show, and it was the number one lead generator for us as a business. And we ultimately ended up exiting that agency because we got bought, in part because we created such a big brand through a podcast and through an old media strategy. So I came in with that experience to the DMO world, and I looked around, and there weren't many DMOs at that time. This was 2001 that were doing much owned content. Hilton Head was one of the few in terms of doing it, and Buford were doing it, and there's a couple of others. And we said, let's try to be disruptive. And the reason we wanted to do this was we saw the writing on the wall. I'd looked at that data and saw that every year we were spending more and more on paid media. And every year it was becoming a little less, the performance was a little lower. And there was a lot of reasons for that. There was increasing number of gatekeepers, whether that's Google or Facebook, that just had big gates to get through, and they were toll keepers, right? They were charging us anytime we wanted to talk to their people. But at the same time, consumers were becoming more fragmented in their consumption. So it was costing us more to reach fewer people. And at the same time, consumers were rejecting traditional advertising. They were saying, we don't want to be advertised to. We don't trust brands. There were increases in privacy. People were using ad blockers, things like that. So it was like we were looking at the future and saying, well, if it's costing us more to reach fewer people who don't want to listen to us anyway, this is going to end in a very bad place. So we said we've got to start investing today in a long-term strategy to build an audience, And we believed that if we could build an audience, we could build a community. And if we could build a community, we could start to have an influence on people's feelings, their thoughts, and their behaviors. And so we started dabbling with some podcasts, and ultimately that led into TV shows. And we've had tremendous success. And I really would double down on what Rob said. One of the real benefits for us, in addition to driving real demand for tourism for a destination, the fostering the sense of gratitude and appreciation within our community has been beyond our wildest dreams. When people see their destination, the restaurants they frequent, the attractions they go to, when they see those on a streaming show on Peacock or on the cooking channel, it gives them this sense of pride in their community that we hadn't seen before. So definitely want to dig into that a little bit later, but I'll leave it there. I'm sure there's a lot of sub questions you want to ask, but I'll hand it to Malia.
Yeah, Malia, and thanks, Stuart. But tell us a little bit, Malia, about some of the efforts in your destination as well.
Yeah, like Rob, I grew up on a farm, a country girl. My dad had cows, and I've helped him bale many bales of hay. And oh, sorry, my cat is joining. It feels like 2020 all over again. But one thing that Rob said that I totally identified with is the evergreen part is because I tell people all the time who want to be on and, oh, we want to talk about this specific event that's coming up. And I'm like, okay, but let's talk about it in a way that next year when the event comes up, I can use this again, and it's not just a one and done, because we record 2 times a month. And, like Rob said, like, I want something that's going to live forever. I recently did a top 10 countdown at the end of last year of our top 10 most listened to episodes. And there wasn't one single episode that it was like, oh man, like I can't put this on there because it's over, like they were all where I could have them out there and people could listen to them and experience them and go visit the places. And then kind of getting into what he said about people wanting to be a part of this, and even Stuart as well. One of I think it was our last episode, it was Valentina's Pizzeria in Madison, Alabama. And his PR person actually reached out to us to want to be on the podcast. And of course, we're a member organization. So I said, well, we feature our members. They had a check. I mean, they had it paid within the week. We had it scheduled. And I thought, this is great, that the people in the community see that this is valuable. They want to be a part of it to get their name out as well.
Yeah, I love that. And, each of you talked about a couple of different things. One, I want to touch on the evergreen nature of putting content at the center of what you're doing, because, when you run a paid ad, the moment that ad is surfaced, the money that's associated with that ad is gone, right? Whether or not the person converts. But if you create evergreen content that is findable, in a lot of cases, that content, like you said, Malia, when we first started talking about the TikTok thing, that you had one post kind of do what you wanted to do and go viral, and then all of a sudden you see those views go onto a lot of the older posts that you've done. A podcast or another owned media asset like a streaming series or whatever it is can really create that kind of situation where you spent the money on it, but that money kind of compounds over time and you get the return coming back to those assets. Let's start with you, Malia. So you decided to do a podcast, and I know that that's one of the key pieces of content that you're doing. What made you decide to do it? And like, because in the stakeholder environment that we're all in, there's a lot of people on the board or in the community that say, I want to see that action tied to a visit, or you shouldn't have it in your budget, right? So how did you go kind of say, I'm willing to take a risk on creating an asset like a podcast, and then how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, well, the funny story I always go back to, I was kind of told that I was going to start a podcast because I remember when you and I first met, I was on your podcast about recovery back in 2020. And, you said, hey, if you ever want to do a podcast, and I'm thinking, oh, that's so out of my comfort zone, which is ridiculous. I can't believe I ever thought that. So then my boss came to me and said, we should do a podcast. And, we were actually, we're the only DMO in our state, I think, that has a podcast. I hope I'm not getting in trouble by saying that. But we wanted to reach, a younger audience. We, on our social media, we tend to have, a set audience on there on Facebook, Instagram. So we were trying to reach a younger audience, which we haven't yet. We're working on that, but we're reaching like a little bit of an older audience. But yeah, we just wanted to get out there in that, I guess, arena, so to speak, to have that content. And like you said, to farm, to farm our content and have it out there that we own it. It's ours. We can share it over and over and over again, that it never goes out of style. But yeah, that's how it's kind of evolved over time.
So how does the show look today compared to what you thought it was going to look like when you started it?
I think I've tried. There was an episode, probably it was early on, it was within the first year of us doing this, and I had a mural artist on, and because we have a North Alabama mural trail, so I wanted to highlight some of those murals, but I also I thought, oh, this would be really cool to have an artist on, to have him talk about his art and the meaning behind some of these murals. So then that way, when people visit the murals, they're like, oh, I know the story behind this, and it makes it even more beautiful. And it was in that episode that I thought, this is what I want it to be. I want to bring out the people who are in our destination, not just the attractions, which we have some amazing attractions, but also the people who are in those attractions. And at the end of our episode, I always ask, what has been unexpected that you have encountered on this journey, that they've been in. And their answers are always, they pause and they're like, oh, wow. And so I always know I'm going to get, this heartfelt answer. And I think that's been something that has evolved, is bringing out like the personalities within our region and not just the attractions.
It's become much more people story centric than just an attraction or a dining establishment, things like that. I like that.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Stuart, how about you? You guys have, and I want to make sure that I make this clarification as we go into some of the things you're going to talk about, Stuart, because Malia and Rob, I would classify both of you as coming from a smaller destination with a smaller budget. And then Stuart comes from a larger destination with a larger budget, which does give Stuart some of the freedom to maybe try a couple of things that other destinations don't get the opportunity to try. And Stuart, I would love to have you maybe talk about philosophically how you guys implemented it, but I'd really like for the audience to hear about traveling the spectrum and how that came about, because it's such an important case study for the industry.
Yeah, and I'll preface it by saying you're 100% right. We're very fortunate in the resources we have. We are a larger destination with 20 million visitors a year, the number one coastal destination for leisure travel in the country, and so that affords us a lot of resources. But you don't have to have a lot of resources to do this stuff, right? I think you just have to be scrappy. You have to be willing to try and fail, and you only need to invest a little bit. I mean, look at what I talked about earlier. When I got started in the podcasting world, it cost me $80, right? There's not a DMO in the world that can't spend $80 on a microphone and then go on YouTube and learn how to record a podcast. And I'll tell you what, it's a lot easier now than it was in 2016 when I started, right? So there's a lot of tools, but Traveling the Spectrum was a passion project of ours. We'd already dabbled with podcasting, and we'd already done one TV show. We did a cooking show. It was a competition show, and we wanted to do more. We'd seen success from what we'd done, and we wanted to sort of double down. And a few things sort of came together. One was we'd done a lot of work. We were the first destination in the world to be certified sensory friendly by Champion Autism Network. We trained hundreds of businesses, from accommodations, restaurants, and attractions, on recognizing some of the challenges that people with neurodiversity face and how to accommodate some of the special needs related to neurodiversity and autism. And so we had a good product, and we really wanted to showcase that product in an organic way. And then we also came across a stat that 87% of families who have a kiddo on the spectrum don't take family vacations together. And it sort of, it broke our heart. And knowing that we're a family destination and sensory friendly, we said, let's really show the world that this can be done and drop that number dramatically. So we conceived this concept of a show called Traveling the Spectrum. We decided we were going to not make it branded, not make it a Visit Myrtle Beach thing. We wanted it to stand on its own. So we created the concept and went and pitched it to streaming services, and even started shooting a pilot before we got picked up. But eventually we ran into Peacock, and Peacock were gracious enough to say, yeah, we'll take this show and we'll publish it on our streaming network. But the premise is we take 3 families, each with a kiddo or a family member on the autism spectrum, and we brought them to Myrtle Beach for a week to experience a typical family vacation, and we documented it. We documented the good, the bad, and the meltdowns, and we packaged it in a way that really showed the people. It was about the people. It wasn't about the destination. We're big believers that Myrtle Beach should be the backdrop of stories, not the hero of the story. And so people, passion, and purpose are what stories are about. And so we said, let's make the people, the families, the full family unit, not just the person with neurodiversity. Let's make them the heroes of the story so that the audience can see themselves. And what really happened, which sort of surprised us, was we saw almost the hero's journey happen with all 3 families. We saw all of them grow as individuals and as a family unit. And what we saw was the power of travel. We saw on screen, and now the world can see it on Peacock streaming, we saw that travel is transformational. It can save a marriage. It can bring a family together. It's where people will create the greatest memories of their lifetime. And we captured that. And it's such a pure, organic way to tell the essence of Myrtle Beach, that we've just gotten so much positive feedback, and we're getting emails every day from people that have seen this show, Traveling the Spectrum on Peacock, and are saying, I had no idea that Myrtle Beach was like this, and I had a perception, and now I'm coming to Myrtle Beach for the first time. And it's been such an outpouring of support, not just from the autism community, which has been phenomenal, but from the neurotypical community too, that's saying, I had no idea the challenges that people with autism face. And now I know I can be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. Because there are simple things like, if you see a kiddo having a meltdown in a restaurant, a lot of folks are quick to judge the parents, right? And offer a not so helpful advice to the parents. And you don't know what that family's going through. You don't know what the situation is, and you don't know if that's the first time that family's ever tried to take their child out to a restaurant. And you can really help that situation, but you can also really hurt the situation and destroy the confidence for that family to try it again ever. And the one thing that really broke my heart was every one of these families sort of came to the realization that by not taking vacations, not exposing their children to the adventure of travel, they were doing their family and their individual children a disservice. And so there's millions of people living with autism that are sheltering their child, and they believe they're doing the right thing. And I'm not judging people that do that, but we're opening up people's eyes to see that there's potential out there. You can travel. I mean, it's more difficult and you have to prepare a little differently, but it's possible. And so the story was never about Myrtle Beach, and it never will be about Myrtle Beach. And so that's how we see branded entertainment, is it's never about us. We're not the hero of the story. We're just a conduit or an incubator or a backdrop to the story. So I think what I've heard from Rob and Malia is the same thing. They're not telling stories about their destination. They're telling stories about the people in their destination and the character and the culture of their destination, right? The destination is the backdrop. It's not the hero of the story.
Yeah. And one of the things, and I appreciate that, Stuart, one of the things that I want to call out here is, even though you are a larger destination with 20 million visitors a year, there's still limitations to what your budget can do. So for example, you don't have a significant media buy in LA, at least as far as I'm aware. That would be a crazy fragmentation of your budget. But creating content like this and then getting distribution on Peacock now allows anybody in the country who has an interest congruent with what that show is to be able to see that show, have an experience with Myrtle Beach, and really make themselves part of the story, and suddenly have a desire to come to Myrtle Beach. And so the other thing about creating content like this allows you to expand beyond the geographical limitations that your budget requires if paid media is at the center of your strategy.
Yeah, it does two things really well. One, you're exactly right. It creates sort of this reach that you can't get with paid media. That's an annuity, right? It continues to pay dividends beyond. And you mentioned earlier, like once you've paid for paid media and then you've spent the money, you can't reach the audience anymore. You have to do it. It's like leasing space, right? You're leasing the audience, and when you build an asset like this, you own it. You're not leasing it, and you can use it not just in its original form, like in our case on Peacock, but later on, a year or now, two from now, we could drop that on Brand USA's Go USA TV app, or we could drop it on YouTube. We can slice it up and put it on YouTube Shorts, and we can use it on social media, and we can put it on our website. And so there's a lot of different ways you can reuse. So yeah, it was a decent chunk of an investment, but it's an annuity, right? And if we spread that investment out over the lifetime of the project, it's really not more expensive than paid media, because I can continue to leverage it over a decade potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, what about you? How has your show, and like I mentioned before, guys, I will always value the relationship that I have with Rob, because when COVID hit, I had 5 destinations who had signed on to trial and pilot a podcast program for destinations. And when COVID hit, 4 of them dropped off, and only 1 of them stayed on and said, "Yeah, I'm going to give this a shot." And that was Rob. And really, Rob taking a chance on our organization and going through that process changed the trajectory of my career and our business, and actually ended up having a lot to do with our decision to rebrand the organization, as Melissa was talking about at the beginning. And so, Rob, it's been so fun to watch your owned media asset evolve. And one of the things I think is fascinating about the way you use it, I don't want to cede too much what you're going to say, but the way you use it to power other efforts, including earned media, I think is one of the most powerful uses that I've seen of owned media. So I'd love to hear about the evolution of your show, and then how you use it to power other efforts.
Yeah, and I'll jump right into that just real quick. I mean, we have a few travel writers and influencers coming to town. They've been sent episodes that fit what they write about. And just as a backdrop, we're not asking them to write about the podcast. We're just asking them to get some ideas. They travel into town and kind of see how it does, because we know that what we do as a DMO, we've always created content. It may be a visitor guide, or it may be, some other piece of content that we've used, but those have set like a trusted resource for travelers, right? Well, podcasting for us became a way for us to build more of this trust and resource for them. And so when we share that in our PR efforts, it gives a little bit, a little backdrop for them to use. It also maybe highlights partners or stakeholders or people that we think have great stories, but they're not here to cover. And it's not going to be a part of their itinerary. We've seen several features recently in which they listened to the podcast. They gave them another story prompt for another time, got them picked up on a social piece, and the influence happened. And we love it, because we value the author, the writer, and or the influencer and their audience. Their audience trusts them. And if they're talking, about Beaufort and Port Royal in a way that was authentic, then it's going to come across and be what we want it to be. And sometimes sometimes they're cold calls with writers, but the podcast helps us warm them up a little bit before they get to the area. Jumping right in, though, is about taking the chance. Adam, when we started the podcast, you remember our conversation regarding Evergreen and that kind of concept. But the biggest thing is that we were like looking at like ads. They capture attention. That's great. But content captures a little bit more. It noticed that I can't figure out algorithms all the time, but I know that I can tell the story of Beaufort better than anybody, right? And so I can have people who help me tell that story, and that's who jumps on the podcast. And we were able to do that, and we've got plenty of examples. One of the episodes, kayak in the Low Country, Jim has showed up in the office saying, "Thank you so much for letting us be a part of the podcast." People reference the podcast and our being on there and telling our story of how we found Buford and how we share Buford on the water, and it's as a precursor for booking trips. Excellent. That's exactly what we're looking for. And we see it, we go through it. It also builds a sense of community in our tourism stakeholders to being part of the storytelling. And that's huge.
Yeah, I actually want to go to stakeholders next, Rob, and I'm going to stay with you. But I'll never forget when we were about 5 months into your podcast and you got the email from those honeymooners who had heard about Buford on your podcast and
Yeah.
were now planning their honeymoon to come to Buford. And we had this kind of virtual high five moment, right? Where it's like, hey, it's working,
It was
right?
it was so awesome to have that. It was one of those cool moments. And there's been
Yeah.
several. I mean, I get to share my low country boil recipe routinely. I still have people email me once or twice a month for that. Everybody, just for the record, I did get laid off at the podcast. We have a talented team. They're like, "Rob, you're only going to come back and do certain episodes. You're not going to be the host anymore." And that's fine. They do a great job. But man, listening to the stories of people who use the podcast to find the website was interesting and eye-opening.
Yeah.
Because we only thought there were several avenues to get to the website. And here's a small destination that has a small budget using something that we, our best resource, our time, to tell our story and have people land there. And of course, the data, as Stuart mentioned, backs it up. When people feel connected to a destination, they want to see it, they want to talk about it. And, Daquan Mickens, who's the host of the Intercoastal podcast, he was working in the visitor center, just kind of covering for some people who needed to step out for a moment. Lady comes in, hears his voice, says, "Oh, you're on the podcast," and got the meeting first. Love those connections. They're lasting. We do a lot better with our repeat visitors than we do our first-time visitors. They're easier to bring back to town, and so podcast helps us capture that.
Awesome. Let's talk about stakeholders, and you brought that up, and I think it's really interesting because usually the biggest objection I hear when I'm trying to talk to destinations about taking on a content project like a podcast or a streaming series, a YouTube series, whatever it is, it's, "Oh man, my stakeholders would never go for that." And then when you guys talk about the results of taking on a project like this, one of the things you lead with is, "Oh man, and the impact it's had on my stakeholder relationships is amazing." So there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg here, right? And so, Rob, I want to learn a little bit more about how you engage your stakeholders and what that transition was like going from, yeah, we're going to invest in this thing that we can't really tie direct bookings to from the very get-go, and converting that to now the value that your stakeholders place on it when they look at what you do as an organization.
So we scripted out the first 10 podcast episodes. Like, this is who we're going to go talk to. This is who we're going to bring them in. A lot of hesitation on their parts to sit down. By episode 3, the word had kind of gotten out that we were doing these episodes and podcasts. They started hearing the podcast, the stakeholders started listening, and the emails and phone calls started flooding in. And through 116 episodes, I think we've recorded, I don't think we've done 115 live. There's only been a handful of times where we've had to call in someone to fill in that gap. They're signing up. They want to be a part of it. They love telling the stories. And it's been everything: business owners, local historians, other podcasters, other bloggers. I mean, just other people who tell the story of Buford in the area. That's been huge. We weren't expecting that. And then to get the feedback from the guests that have been on the show, just coming in off air and just behind the scenes saying things like, "Man, thank you so much for just listening, or letting me be a part of it. Letting me be a part of selling the area." And then seeing some of them capture business from the podcast is just icing on the cake.
Awesome. Stuart, how about for you with stakeholder relationships? I mean, you guys have, especially as a chamber, as part of your organization, you have a lot of stakeholder relationships you have to manage. How do you use this as a tool to strengthen those relationships?
Yeah, it's, people like to talk about themselves. I've learned that along the way, especially business owners. And it's been a great way to break down barriers. Maybe there's been businesses in the area that we haven't been the closest to. We haven't had the most collaborative relationship. But when we reach out to them, and instead of saying, "Hey, we want to sell you something," but we say, hey, we'd love to talk about your business or your story on this show or on this project. And the overwhelming response is heck yeah, like we want to do that. It's free exposure. It isn't a big commitment. It usually takes maybe an hour of time when they come into our office, or we'll go to them and we'll record a conversation. And then there's just a sense of pride from the individual stakeholders when they get to hear their story told to an audience. But we have multiple stakeholders. We have our members, the businesses. We also have our elected officials. We also have our residents, right? And so this touches all three of those. It touches every type of stakeholder. And when you invite an elected official to talk on your podcast, especially if it's around election season, as long as you're being fair to all of them, man, does that buy you some good credibility and some goodwill with the elected official. But I think for me, I believe that DMOs exist to improve the quality of life of the residents in their community. Like that's, to me, the core purpose of why any DMO exists. We do that through tourism and inviting the visitors, but ultimately we're investing the taxpayers' dollars on their behalf to improve the quality of life. And so my favorite thing that I've seen in all these projects is the outpouring on social media of community pride from the residents, and then the goodwill that comes back to our organization, because it used to be, the DMO, or in our case, the chamber, because we're a chamber in the CVB, they're spending all this money and we don't see the results, right? Because a lot of what we're doing is out of market. When we're advertising, our residents don't get to see it, so that they don't really know what's going on. There's a mystery to it. But when we do this kind of stuff, it's tangible and tactile, and they can actually see and touch and hear it. And so it makes a big difference. They feel it, and we feel the love that comes back from them. So yeah, I think we weren't, like Rob said at the beginning, we were shocked at how much of a positive response we got from our residents. I mean, we knew it would be there to a degree, but we had no idea how much it was going to be an overwhelmingly positive experience.
Yeah, when you're featured in a story, there's a sense of pride that comes along with it, right? Or even if you see, something you're affiliated with on TV, if you're part of that community, you're excited to be featured, and so I think that makes a ton of sense. Mm-hmm. What about you, Malia? From a stakeholder perspective, how has it helped you strengthen those relationships with your stakeholders?
Yeah, and I've got to say, I knew I was making a mistake when I said it. There is another DMO in our area, our friends in Decatur, who have a podcast. So my apologies.
Oh man,
I've
I should have
waiting.
known that.
I know you should have. You've been Malia. They're one of our people. So I got to clear the air. I've been waiting on this moment. We have a lot of rural communities in our region. We have 16 counties, so we do have a lot of rural areas, and places that don't get a lot of love, compared to our bigger towns like Huntsville or Florence or places like that. And so it's been helpful to reach out, to some of those attractions and businesses, because they appreciate, any kind of coverage that we can do. And I love the responses that I get when they're like, "Oh my gosh, I've never been on a podcast before." I'm like, "Well, here you go." And so, then it's something that they can share as well, and to share their story. And like Stuart said, people love to talk about themselves, to talk about their business, and to share their story. And I think it's strengthened, our relationship, because it gives us another way to promote them in, a whole different arena other than, like the paid media, the website, social media. So it's a whole other way to get their name out there.
Great. I'm sure we could talk for a long time about this. This is like my favorite topic, so I could spend hours on it. But I'd love to get to questions. I guess before we do, the last thing I'd like to hear from each one of you is, doing something like this is a risk, right? You're essentially trading some short-term return for larger long-term returns, but you don't necessarily have a guarantee that those long-term returns are going to come. Each of you went through that process. So I guess, knowing what you know now, why would you sacrifice some short-term return in exchange for the long-term returns of creating a content asset like each of you have? Malia, let's just start with you and go back through.
Um, Number one, I guess I would just have to say from a personal perspective, is it's fun. I mean, I didn't think it was going to be fun. I thought, like I said earlier, that it was out of my comfort zone. Um, but it's a really fun way to get people's stories out there, and I have gotten some pushback from, some people, not in our organization, but maybe on the board or whatever, of, this is kind of expensive. And I'm like, yes, but let me tell you what all the benefits are, for this, of having this type of product out there for the world to see. And I just say that, it's worth the risk to get out there and to have people to tell their stories, give them an avenue to share their stories.
Great. Thanks, Malia. And
Mhm.
it's interesting because I think there really is intangible value of sharing
Mhm.
those stories from your
Yeah.
destination, that would be difficult to ever put on like a slide deck or something for your
Yeah.
board. So I think that makes
Yeah.
a ton of sense. What about you,
Yeah.
Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's risk in doing anything new, right? But I think there's, in my opinion, there's a bigger risk in not trying this. I
Absolutely.
think, as I
Mhm.
articulated at the beginning, I think paid media is getting more expensive and it's harder to reach an audience through paid media. And
Mhm.
it's, you're not guaranteed to have the funding tomorrow that you have today. And
Mhm.
so you need to build a defense against that. And the best
Mhm.
way to do it is through owned content. And, we've talked about all the benefits. Not just do you reach an audience, not just do you have a better connection with the audience and can you influence an audience better, but you improve relationships. You have a
Mhm.
lot of fun. Like Malia said, it is a lot of fun to create this content
Yeah.
and make something you're proud of. So I think the bigger risk is not
Mhm.
trying it. And I think if you're still apprehensive, you don't have to start big. You can start
Mhm.
very small. And the worst possibility is no one listens or no one watches what you create. And so what's the downside? We tried a lot of different content projects in the 4 years I've been here. Not all of them have been successful, but we've learned along the way what works and what doesn't work, and we've canceled some projects and we've iterated on some projects. So I think you just got to be scrappy and change. Consumer behavior is changing more quickly than it's ever changed. And that's only going to accelerate with the onset
Mhm.
of AI. And so it's possible the DMO website is not a relevant asset 5 years from now. If consumers embrace agents in AI, if they embrace conversational AI the way they seem to be, 5 years from now, I don't know what the relevance of a DMO is unless it's creating communities and audiences through content, right? To me, that's the future of the
Mhm.
DMO. And I always say this, Adam teases me because I say it too often. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. And so you got to start now. This isn't something you're going to reap rewards or be able to farm the fruits of your labor straight away. It takes time. It takes energy. And so you've got to start it somewhere. And I'd say the worst way to fail in life is to not try. So now's the time to try.
Awesome. Thanks, Stuart. Rob?
Absolutely. What Stuart's saying, Malia, that those are exactly right. It's fun. And there's a risk in not doing something.
Mhm.
Most people on this listening to this webinar do not know that the Spanish actually founded a place called Santa Elena in 1566. Why? Because they started hunting instead of farming, and they couldn't sustain themselves long term, and they were non-existent. And St. Augustine became the first city founded in the United States at the time, right? And that story is like a nod to all of us, to just to remind ourselves that the risk of not doing it could be your doom, and we could be looking for something else to put out there. Generating content, building communities, those are all very, very important, as Stuart said.
Great. Thanks. I'd really like to open it up for questions, and we do have one in the Q&A right now that I'd like to pose to any of you that want to answer. We probably won't go to every single person on every single question because I want to make sure we can get to as many questions as we can. The first question that we've got is they'd like to understand, and this is Guy Glazer. Thank you, Guy, for the question. Just some basic podcast questions. How long? What type of topics? Anything like that we want to touch on? Like, do you go 15 minutes, 30 minutes?
Yes.
What do you recommend? Rob?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, 15, 30. It depends on how the conversation goes. Nothing above 30 too often. You know, the biggest thing that when people ask about our podcast, the biggest thing is consistency. Like, just do it. Like, continue to do it. Don't say you're going to do a podcast every week and then do it every month. That doesn't work. So for us, we found our consistent knob being every 2 weeks, and we can record. It's 15 to 30 minutes. Those topics are just about our area, and we're not as political about some of the politics of the matter. That that's not what the podcast does. But man, podcast topics can be all over the place.
Yeah. Anybody want to add to that, or you want me to chime in here?
I mean, I think it really depends on what you're trying to do and who your audience is. Obviously the number one podcast in the world goes over 3 hours. So I wouldn't set an arbitrary limit. I think, how long does it take you to tell the story you're trying to tell? And that's appropriate. But to Rob's point, I think consistency is everything. If you will not build an audience on day one. Doesn't matter how good your content is. It's a much easier to create great content, than it is to build the audience. And the audience only comes with consistency over a length of time, And so, we were talking earlier about Malia and you now all of a sudden spiking on social media, and it's having a ripple effect back in time through the old content, right? You're an overnight success, but it takes months or years of consistent quality work to get to that point. And so I think being consistent is the biggest thing.
Yeah. I agree with that. Are you coming in, Malia?
Yeah, I was going to say, while I would never, like Stuart and Rob said, tell the story, of course, but never cut anyone off. But I will say our sweet spot is 22 to 25 minutes that people really will consume the majority of, our podcast if we keep it around in there.
Yep.
And you get data, right? You're going to see what people are listening to and if people are falling off. So it's not a go out and stick to the plan no matter what. Right. It's an iterative learning process. So go throw some stuff out there, see how people respond, in gradually improve it and tweak it. And you might find you need to go shorter or longer, but play around, have fun.
Your audience will tell you. Right? Like you're gonna, if you look at the data, you'll know which topics weren't interesting, which I've definitely eliminated topics that I like talking about, but the audience clearly didn't find as compelling as I did on my show, right? As far as length of an episode goes, this is why we test, right? So I would record some 15-minute episodes, record some 30-minute episodes, look at you can actually see in the podcast platforms what percentage of the content was completed. Did they listen to 80% of the episode on average, 90% of the episode on average? And you can actually compare, okay, did I get more volume of listenership on the longer episode, but shorter engagement? Those are all the different things you can start to weigh and test. And the trick is to get started so you have some data to work with. That's the most important thing. And that's where the consistency Rob and Stuart touched on comes in. Are there any other questions from the audience that we can answer? So Guy has another question. Where do you publish and what software do you use? Is that something that you guys would like to chime in on? If not, I can jump in. So I think we publish all of your podcasts, and so we do it through a product. We just switched actually to a product called Megaphone that was just purchased by Spotify, which creates some great integrations between this publishing software and Spotify. Even though it publishes to all the different platforms, Megaphone has been a really valuable tool that we've switched to recently. So I would say look at Megaphone as a hosting and distribution platform.
Yeah, and people often get stuck on these kind of questions, right? It doesn't really matter. I mean, go do your research. Look, there's millions of articles and YouTube videos about the pros and the cons of different ones, and whatever's winning today might not win tomorrow, but you can always switch later on. It can be a little pain in the butt, but it's not impossible to switch. But there's tons of platforms out there for the Destination Discourse show that Adam and I do. I still use Audio Boom, which is what we used to use for our podcast before we switched. But when I started 10 years ago plus with podcasts, I was editing in GarageBand on my Mac, which is a free software that's on, and then I was publishing through SoundCloud. It cost, I think it was $100 a year for an account, and then there's free software out there like Blueberry that will push that out to iTunes and all the other places. You've got to be present where the audience is. iTunes and Spotify, the number 1 and 2, Stitcher's up there too. There's a couple of others, but most platforms today are so good that you once you've set it up and you've pushed your feeds out to those platforms, every episode's just automatically going to go out everywhere. So I think being ubiquitous, being everywhere is important. The software you use to do that doesn't matter as much as having quality content and being consistent with the publishing.
Yep, 100%. And a lot of those logistical questions, either a quick plug into ChatGPT or a Google search will get you a lot of those answers that you're looking for logistically. I want to thank you guys for coming on. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. I'll wrap with just a quick story that each of the people on this webinar with me today started out as guests on my podcast. And I don't think any of us realized years ago when we met that we'd be on a panel together discussing this strategy. But what we've learned along the way is actually what's led me to rebrand and restructure my entire organization, because I really believe that farming as a strategy and building communities through owned content is the path for destinations to not only retain relevancy, but also to ensure their growth for the long term. And I'm really excited to invite other brands to join the Brand Revolt with us. So thank you so much for the time. And Melissa, thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Adam, thank you so much. We appreciate you, Brand Revolt, for putting this together. To all the panelists, we appreciate it so much. Adam, I was on your podcast, and do we have something coming up?
Yes, we do.
The One West podcast.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I didn't know which thing you're referring to. I thought you meant the tech
yes, there are things, but yes, I was on your podcast, and it's turned into a One West podcast that's coming soon too.
Absolutely right, and I can't wait to see how that turns out, because it's been really fun to get it planned and going.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much to all of you attendees. Thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it, and we will see you on the next one next month. Thank you all so much.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
See ya.